I would like for the next few minutes for us all to set aside any preconceived notions of moral evil. Wipe it clear from our mind's chalkboard and try to reimagine it right from the start. I don't want you thinking that there's not evil. I just want you thinking that there's not a single one of us that actually knows what it is. Can we all do that temporarily? Now, without adding your own notions back in, I want you to add back in all the competing notions of others regarding evil. Competing because there are various views in this regard. Some people view people of another race as evil, for instance. Some a different caste or culture. Some an opposing religion. Another political party, let's say. There are some perceptions that most of us have in common, like murder, like stealing. But even then, there are vast discrepancies on what constitutes murder and what, if any, punishment is appropriate. Let's detach our personal views from this consideration for the time being. The first question that I have for us is to consider what makes any of these other competing notions of evil any more correct than any of the rest. Now then, let's clear the board one more time, remove all our preconceived notions, and just add back in God's perception of moral evil. Our topic today stems from my recent wrestling match with King Solomon's Proverbs 8:13, which reads, "The fear of the Lord is to hate evil. Pride and arrogance and the evil way and the froward mouth do I hate." And in context, that's wisdom. Wisdom hates these things, not necessarily Solomon or us. It's wisdom, speaking out, saying pride and arrogancy and the evil way and the froward mouth do I hate. At first, I thought I knew what evil meant here. Isn't it clearly illustrated in the phrase pride and arrogance and the evil way and the froward mouth? I'm a Christian who believes wholeheartedly that he does fear the Lord, most certainly. And dare I say, most or almost properly. But wait, hasn't the hate of evil in the Christian past also brought about pride and arrogance and the evil way and the froward mouth of its own? Haven't the devotees of competing religions brought about much of the same? Haven't the members of all various religious and non-religious persuasions, for all of their good intentions, also produced considerable evil? So, I said wrestling here because either hate means something completely other than what I first expected, or else reverence does. Here's some initial considerations before we really dig into this. As of right now, we should all have on our chalkboard, filled with only the perceptions of God towards evil, not any other notion. Such a consideration is very difficult, isn't it? If not impossible. That is because none of us can really claim that we know who this God is. I would like to keep that nebulous unfamiliarity in front of us for a while. As we continue, it'll benefit our further considerations, especially for those of you that don't have the same Christian or biblical view as I do. Whether you believe in a creator or an interpersonal supreme being or not, I'm going to ask you for this consideration's sake to just, for a moment, for the time being, imagine there being a God as the absolute truth and the absolute authority. Who and what he is, we don't know. We'll just think of him as, I'll call it, quote, mysterious God. I'll use that phrase, mysterious God. That way there's not any Judeo-Christian or anything to mix up with it. And please indulge me this for a short time. I also want you to suppose the greater context of the chapter here, Proverbs 8, from which this verse is lifted. Suppose that it's true, that wisdom has been with God from before creation, that wisdom is behind everything God has done ever since, that God's end objective is wise, and that this same wisdom has been calling out to mankind to hear and thus become a benefactor of. This is wisdom's voice Solomon is portraying to have said these things. Do I hate? And it's only fair that we take the author's word in complete context. So now let's begin. We've got our chalkboard set up here. We've made our initial considerations. We're going to suppose some things. We're going to keep God as a nebulous form for the time being. First thing I would like to consider here that Solomon brings up is the issue of pride. Pride is our first major consideration. I would like for us to think in whole different terms for a moment. Let us think not so much in terms of deeds or that are done or intentions, but in terms of final outcomes. As Jesus said, a good tree cannot bear evil fruit. Remember now that there's nothing but mysterious God's perception of evil up on our chalkboard. What if all man has done and said, all the good and all the bad and all the best of intentions, all that time spent, the blood, the sweat, the tears that we've expended, that all this in the end comes down to one final thing. Kind of like the Bible envisions, something like an Armageddon. Cannot everything that led to that climatic evil be said also to have been evil? It did not prevent it from happening. All this good and all this blood and sweat and tears did not prevent it from happening. And it might be said that in some ways it even supported it. What then would any of us have to be proud about? What if in the middle of the 1960s, the time when I was growing up, what if in the middle of the 1960s it had all come down to the fulfillment of that, quote, mutually assured nuclear destruction? Would there have been anything left for science to have been proud of? Would there have been anything for the government systems and politicians to have boasted about? Would it matter which country was right and which country was wrong? Would any of us that had let it come to this have any cause for great swelling? No. Despite the good ethics and good morality, despite all of our good families and our good wholesome marriages, despite the farmers and the fishermen and the artisans and the poets, someone looking at this from outside would see it as one accumulating thing and would want to keep it from their alternate universe, keep it far, far away from any of this. Thankfully, in the 1960s, it never did come to this. I present this as a matter of illustration only, that the parts of a moral society are never greater than its final sum. Intended or unintended, that which we are proud of is not the appropriate measure to gauge what evil is. How can I illustrate this better? Let's take the Soviets. The Soviets did not intend to kill the millions. Some estimates are 50 million of its own citizens that it did end up killing. They thought it good to tear down the ruling class of the bourgeoisie. But in doing so, they shattered the moral hedge surrounding public trust and their perceived security or their perceived sense of justice. They opened the door to a whole lot of what every one of us could call moral evil and made a way for an unstoppable totalitarian tyrant who for his own political survival attempted to squelch the voice of the intelligentsia and the proletariat. Was what every Soviet citizen thought and did evil? Certainly not. Yet in terms of the outcome of the whole lot, a whole lot of evil was done despite what every citizen had intended. Let's scale that illustration down a bit, see if it still applies. Let's consider an abusive jailer. The jailer is a family man. He provides very well for his family. He is an elder in his church and by all accounts is regarded a model citizen. The question is, how much good does it take to counterbalance or exceed the abusiveness he inflicts upon his prisoners? How can a man who is not evil by most standards do evil? Evil or small? Is there not an overwhelming amount of self-exaltation found at the core? Now, certainly that's not all that makes up evil, but it's enough to go a long way. If we can see that, well, so can this mysterious God. Mysterious God would, of course, be right in hating this about this situation. And as of yet, we've not who this mysterious God is, only how he might see things as they accumulate and develop here on earth. We can see by this, however, the value we give to pride might not translate to the value he places against it. If this is true in the extreme grand scale, it may hold true on the much smaller personal scale as well. The second item here that Solomon brings up, arrogancy. Wisdom hates arrogancy. Arrogancy is having been told better or having known better, but defiantly doing it your way anyway. Remember that we haven't yet established who this mysterious God is. We are only supposing that in one way or another, he has made wisdom known either through some innate moral conscience or perhaps some direct intervention or overarching moral law or some, discernible rational intelligence that we have. But somehow this has been made known. The arrogancy of evil suggests that what has been made known is overruled or subverted. It presents itself in many similar forms. One observable form of this is the idea that, quote, it is not wrong unless I get caught. Another is the notion of, quote, it is not wrong if it doesn't hurt anyone else. Wrong does not always equate to evil, but the mechanism works just the same. Other examples of this are the, quote, there is no one greater to hold me accountable for this. And, or, I don't care what other people think. This is what I want. That line of thought. So now scale this concept to the big scale picture. Wisdom would suggest that every single person is capable of doing evil, even those who are not evil, even those who presume that they are acting on good intentions. Not to pick on the Soviet Revolution, but it is such a ripe and recent example, fresh in our minds. The whole idea behind that revolution was that the capitalist bourgeoisie were corrupt or evil, and that the working proletariat class was not. Truth is, there's a capability of evil innate to both, innate to all political and economic systems. Better way to explain this is that the ability to do evil is innate in man, regardless of political or economic or, yes, even religious system. Systems such as these are man-made moral contrivances or constructs. While they are intended to contain evil, evil rarely is entirely submissive to them. Even if we were to come to a pure Marxist stateless society, we would still be contending with evil just as much, if not more so. This is the fatal flaw of Karl Marx's sociology. And it is the arrogancy of a great many other competing ideologies as well. If the words of King Solomon ring true, It is not the system so much that the Lord hates, it is the evil. On the smaller scale, much of the same can be observed in a myriad of peculiar forms. The high school shooter is the one claiming to have been wrong. The riotous ones out there, destroying property out on the street, the riotous ones are the ones claiming to only have grievances. Get this, a cartoon of Muhammad in a newspaper, in a newspaper with just a certain circulation. A cartoon of Muhammad in a newspaper justifies the endangerment of millions of innocent French citizens. The examples go on and on. What is common in all of these observations? Arrogancy. For the most part, we can assert that the mysterious God has mostly been tolerant thus far of our twists of morality and behavior. If this God does exist, that can mean one of two things. Either we are not evil enough for him to do something about it, or that he is allowing us to prove ourselves convincingly arrogant. Which is more likely? Have we been told by a mysterious God how to make it all better? If you believe this proposition is true, why then are we not doing that? Could it be our mutual arrogance? Third thing, the evil way. The word chosen by Solomon, translated way in the English, better means the course of life in the Hebrew. The concept of evil is not being repeated in the verse here. It's being more narrowly targeted. Again, I would like to consider this in a much different way. The normal course of life, I would hope, would be not to do evil. Seldom is evil ever intended for or planned. There is just a progression that evil normally takes. I imagine upon seeing the newsreels of piled up Jewish bodies there outside the concentration camps at the end of World War II, that the majority of Germans asked themselves for the first time, how did what all we thought we were doing ever come to this? You can imagine the shock and the disbelief. And I imagine that the Germans will forever be asking just that. The course evil will take is not ever fully known. If it were able to be known, we'd likely not take it. Or so we presume. Yet, we do arrive at that unintended point, oftentimes just the same. There are certain things that the Germans may have done that hastened evil's arrival. No one at that time would have said by doing this or doing that and this together or whatever that evil would certainly come from it. Not even the religious Lutherans that made up over 70% of the population at that time. The bending of a moral here and there, we all partake of, no doubt. A little bending here, and there really doesn't cause any hurt. It doesn't hurt any one of us. It's the accumulation of 150 million or more little bendings that hurt society as a whole, and then the wounded society bites back at the individual who is oblivious to what action has just transpired. There definitely is a way or a momentum or a gravity behind evil. Mysterious God need not blaze this trail for us. We are perfectly capable of blazing this trail for ourselves. If there is a Lord looking down upon all this, it wouldn't be with much amusement. He would very much have the right to hate this way about us. Fourth thing to consider. Solomon states it here as a froward mouth. F-R-O-W-A-R-D, froward. It's not a word used very often in contemporary language, but this is a fraudulent mouth in contemporary terms. A mouth that sells us on a much desirable thing, but delivers us quite another thing. Takes from us something valued and returns to us what is not. Like I suggested previously, had we known that this would end up in evil, we would like to think that we would have avoided that. Rarely is evil sold to us as evil. It is sold to us as something much desired. Not to get too preachy here, but the Bible says, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Genesis 3:6. Maybe the forward mouth can be thought of as something just as simple as that. What one wants does not always equate to what one gets. What we have been sold on by these many social and economic ideologies and what we've been sold each other on as a group of congregated peers often bears little resemblance to what, in return for our investment and loyalty, we were ever to receive. Fifth thing here is not stated by Solomon, but it's implied. Context, context, context. From a biblical perspective here, there is also this to consider. From the time of Adam to Moses, and that equals several generations, scores of generations, the time from Adam to Moses, God did leave it in the hands of man's innate moral conscience and relative morality. Within the second generation, we already have a murder over religious sacrifice. Call it pride. Within a few more generations, we have people bragging of committing multiple murders. The daughters of Adam marrying and mating with the renowned. Call that arrogance. By the time of Noah, we had judging the entire population for the reason stated that the imaginations of their hearts were only continually evil. And yet at the same time, we see that population so unconcerned about evil, so unconcerned about judgment, as to be marrying each other and carrying on as if it were all normal and agreed upon. Think of that as the evil way. In the time of Nimrod, we hear it said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." Genesis 11:4. Think of it as a froward mouth. Let me further add, we have the entire population of 2 cities surrounding Lot's house, demanding that the visitors in his house be sent out to them to be sexually brutalized. The visitors, oddly enough, had been there to confirm allegations of the very same type of group behavior previously. From the time of Abraham then to Moses, we have the 450 years of the children of Abraham waiting patiently, waiting for God to bring him into the promised land, waiting, God said, for the iniquity of the Amorites to be completed. And then we have the law, Jehovah's law, being given to Moses for the new nation of Abraham's children, Israel. What we have is a lengthy amount of time crossing several generations for man's innate or agreed upon morality to kick in and work. If it could work, wouldn't it have shown appearances of working in that time? It is thus more than well proven man cannot abide even with his own formulations of morality, nor can he vanquish evil. And the track record really doesn't get any better, man having God's law either. If anything, law only defines better the behaviors man continues to hold to that cannot be stopped even by threats of society's legal enforcement of these laws or their punishment of these immoral behaviors. That doesn't stop it, only defines it. The critic might respond, well, that's some people, not all people. To which I say, that all society is affected, be it the instigator or the victim or the multitude of onlookers as they react. Plus, now you have the additional layer of having to maintain a fair and balanced and impartial court, which often proves itself to be frequently evil as well. Ask yourself this, now having seen a small piece of biblical God's historical perspective, to perhaps fill in the blanks of this mysterious God we've been talking about. Why would this God allow for us to endure the consequences of all this, unless to get our complete, legitimate attention? Why would he have spent so much time establishing this generation by generation by generation, methodically, unless to convince us that his direction, it's a much better direction for us to go? So look at here, Proverbs 8:13, our text for today. It's reading, "The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogancy, and the evil way, and the froward mouth. Do I," meaning wisdom, does wisdom hate? According to King Solomon, this is the Lord's perspective. And for all the time since he said that, it has been well proven that God's perspective is better become the whole part of ours. So now let's make some conclusions. I want you now to clear off the chalkboard and put only your perceptions of evil back onto it. What do you see yourself believing? How would you complete this sentence? Evil is fill in the blank. Hopefully today you've been able to consider the answer from some unorthodox but perhaps beneficial vantage points. One more vantage point that I would like to put out there is the vantage point from which Solomon himself placed it. Maybe we should be rephrasing the question. Instead of evil is, fill in the blank, make it the fear of the Lord is, fill in the blank. Here many of you might be asking, how can I fear? In this case, fears meaning to revere or worship or tremble at the foot of. How can I revere someone that I do not believe in? And please forgive my presumption, but I presume that many of you do not believe in God precisely because of the amount of evil that you see. The question that you would be asking me is, how could a loving God allow for the evil we all know and see all around us? My question to you is, what on earth are we ever to do about evil unless there is a loving God? I don't think that we can ask one question without asking this at the same time, this other question. And there's no easy answer for either of us to give. There's no answer right now that could fully suffice. So let's not get mad at each other about all of this. From a biblical perspective, the best I can offer is that at the fall of man in the garden, we were supposed to have died. It says, in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. And that's the New King James Version of Genesis 2:17. That would have put an end to all of this. Whatever good we might have been capable of generating, or whatever evil, that would have been the end of it. The fact that we did not die then and there, despite our fallen nature, is proof of a loving God. God, however, did not erase the board of consequences, nor could he. He reduced them. He elongated them. We did not die, but we are now dying. Have experienced this and have come to know this loving God, and to experience the one solid mortal stab, and have only known the guilt and shame. And here's the ultimate statement here. Considering this, Such a loving God would only be a loving God if there was something vastly better for us to experience at the end of this lengthy and difficult experience. And I believe that there is such a loving God with such a grand eternal reward. I know that my explanation does not satisfy the objections of many of you, but at least you know where I stand in regards to reverence and where I stand against evil. Please, let neither of us conduct evil, be it from pride or with arrogance or by evil ways or as froward in mouth. Let us not conduct evil on each other in order to make our case.